Hey everybody, my name is Fallon Bader and I'm a registered dietitian. I'm also the owner of the Sprouting Kitchen, where we host virtual and in-person cooking classes in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I'm located. I'm also the culinary chair of the Planetary Health Collective, and I am here today to show you a really fun recipe. So we are going to make crispy oven-baked tofu. A couple of things to start off with. Let's talk about what tofu is. So it's a pressed product of soybeans, and nutrition-wise, it's really high in protein. It's got some fiber in there, and it's a nice sustainable source of protein as well. There are so many ways to cook tofu, and maybe you love tofu, or maybe you've never really had tofu, or you're not sure about it, or you don't like the taste of it. But I'm going to show you today a really quick and tasty way to make it. Tofu is just like a blank sponge, so you can add different flavors to it, and there are thousands of ways of cooking tofu. I'm going to show you one way, but it'll be a good one. So a couple things to know when you go to the grocery store. I found there's like two ways that tofu comes packaged. So this is tofu that it's in the refrigerated section of the grocery store, and usually it has a lot of liquid in it. And this is, good to have. You can have it in your fridge. And then the other way I've seen tofu is on the shelf, like in the pantry section of the grocery store. And this is really nice to just keep on hand because you don't have to refrigerate it, so you can just kind of have it in your pantry. Then there's different levels of like firmness, how kind of tight the tofu is. So right here, this is a super firm one I'm using today, and I really like a extra firm, super firm, whatever they call it in the grocery store, because the tofu stays together when you mix it. There's also like soft tofu, or sometimes it's called like a silken tofu. Those are better in like stews, something where you're not gonna like mix it around, because the tofu can kind of fall apart. And just for the interesting, this is extra firm, but when I did the recipe with this one, it still kind of fell apart a little bit. So each brand of tofu is going to vary a little bit too. All right, so let's get into the recipe. So a lot of times tofu comes in water, as I mentioned, and the key to getting crispy tofu is to drain out that water in the sink. And then you want to wrap a towel around your tofu and then put something heavy on top, like a cast iron pan or really anything. And what this does is it just squeezes that water out of your tofu. So I cut my tofu into just 2 blocks, put the dish towel on it, and I let it sit for about a half hour, and this is like nice and damp. So that's a good sign. We've got a lot of water out of it. Okay, so now we're going to chop up our tofu. So I'm just going to cut it into 3 kind of vertical pieces, turn that around, and then cut these into about 5 cuts. And this should leave you with these nice kind of bite-sized cubes of tofu. You can really, cut it as big or as small as you would like. And cutting tofu is very, it's just so soft. It's a really fun thing to cut, in my opinion. Okay, so now we are going to flavor our tofu. So there's so many ways you can flavor it. I'm just gonna show you this one way. But the first step is you wanna add some oil to your tofu. I'm using a grapeseed oil. You could use sesame if you wanted more of like a sesame, more like Asian style tofu. You could also just use olive oil. And you wanna add about 1 tablespoon. I'm just gonna eyeball that. And then I'm just gonna mix it by just kind of like shaking the bowl around. And just want to get all that tofu nice and coated. And this is why I love that like super extra firm tofu, is you can mix it like that and it doesn't fall apart. It holds its shape really well. And then next we're gonna add our spices. Oh, actually, first, we're gonna add some soy sauce or coconut aminos, just to add a little bit of saltiness and some liquid. Because tofu is a sponge, it really soaks up liquid especially, but also spices. So I am just going to drizzle maybe like a half of a teaspoon. The spice blend I'm going to use does have salt in it, so I don't want to add too much, just to give it a little bit of extra flavoring. So you can see I just mixed that around, looking good. And then for my spices, I really like, this is just like a turmeric twist savory blend. It's got turmeric, onion, garlic, paprika, oregano, all sorts of fun stuff in there. And this is just like makes it so easy when you use a blend like this, but you can of course use your own spices and kind of use spices depending on what you want to pair the tofu with. So you could go more herby, you could go like ginger, paprika, cumin, you could do more of like an Asian ginger, you could go all over the place with the tofu. I like this one, so I'm just gonna sprinkle some on here. I would guess I'm using in total maybe a teaspoon, maybe a teaspoon and a half. You do, like I said, tofu can take a lot of spice, and it's almost better to use like more spice than less, I would say. So just make sure you give it a good kind of sprinkle on there. So I'm just mixing this around, and you can see it's like nice and coated in those spices. All right, now the last step, which is the most important, is our cornstarch. So cornstarch is what adds that crispiness on the outside of our tofu. So for our cornstarch, I like to start with like a heaping teaspoon and just kind of drizzle it, sprinkle it on top. And then same thing, just kind of mix, mix, mix. And all that liquid from the oil and the soy sauce is going to kind of mix with the cornstarch, and it's gonna almost create this like kind of sticky layer on the outside of our tofu, and that's what creates that nice crisping. All right, so at this point I can see what happens is like that cornstarch thickens, and you can see kind of like a crumminess on the tofu. I could stop here. I want to do like maybe another half a teaspoon and just give it one more shake. You could also use a wooden spoon to mix this, but I like this method. It's a fun one. Okay, so there's really no more white. You can't see the cornstarch anymore. That's good. And there's just like some really nice crummy texture around our tofu. Okay, so next we want to take our tofu and place it on a baking sheet. I like to line my baking sheet with parchment paper. It just makes the cleanup a little bit nicer, and things tend to not stick as much. And then you just really want to make sure that you aren't crowding your pan. You want to give each little square, each little cube of tofu its own space, because the crisping really happens when the tofu is touching that nice hot pan in the oven. So I have everything with its own space, and I'm going to pop this into the oven for about 15 minutes at 425. Check on it, and if the bottom side is getting nice and crispy, I'll just turn it over and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I actually let this go for about 20 minutes in the oven. I found that at 20 minutes, you can see this is what we're looking for. It's like a really nice kind of crisping, darker, like a golden brown on the bottom. So just make sure, you give all of your tofu a nice little flip. I'll let this cook for another probably 10-15 minutes. Just keep an eye on it. Everyone's ovens are a little bit different. You want to make sure it's getting like golden brown, but not burnt. Burnt, it's not what we want. All right, so I'll put this back in and I'll show you the end product. Okay, so it has been another about 15 minutes. So they're nice and crispy. They should be able to like move. You shouldn't stick to your cooking sheet. And then on the inside, you can see they're like still pretty like kind of soft and then crispy on the outside, and they're just so good. And you can add these, like I said, to salads, as a side dish with rice, with noodles. It's just a really great source of protein and really flavorful. So give these a try and let us know what you think.